Hello and welcome to the Unofficial Game Pass podcast with me, Connor Smith, and my friend and co-host Odhrán Johnson.
Hello.
Each week we go through a game on Xbox Game Pass and basically discuss it in perhaps an hour format and decide whether it is worth playing for you, whether it's worth picking up, whether it's worth playing over a long time, or maybe just one of those games that you pick up, play for a day, and delete off your hard drive again. But anyway, this week we are looking at Donut County, which is a very interesting game, a small indie game basically. I believe by Ben Esposito, who previously developed What Remains of Edith Finch, which I suppose some would describe as a walking simulator, which is a term I do not like at all, but a very rich narrative game which really impacted me when I first played it. So when I saw this was made by the same person and had a cute style, I thought, I'll pick this up. This looks fun. Now the premise is basically one that you might be aware of already. It's basically that I've heard people say it's similar to Katamari, I believe, or a reverse Katamari, where you start off as a small hole in the ground and you swallow the objects that will fit inside the hole, like a sinkhole, and you get bigger and bigger until you're swallowing like buildings and stuff. It's I think a few games have been released like this, or it may remind you of you had those like .io games which were quite similar. But Odhrán, what were your first impressions of Donut County? Perhaps when I recommended it and you looked at it, what did you think?
Yeah, so it's no secret that we wanted to pick sort of a shorter game so we'd have a bit of time to maybe dedicate to longer games, and plus so we're not going to be here next week, so we needed a video to be prepared. So I suppose Donut kind of fits into that role very well. I knew nothing about it before you recommended it, and my first sort of, I suppose, exposure to it then was looking it up and seeing obviously the cover art for it, which I absolutely adore. I think it's like I love all these sorts of, like, especially for smaller indie titles, I love this sort of bright, vibrant colors, and I love stuff, as much as I love realism games, I love stuff that embraces that sort of goofy arcadiness of sort of smaller titles as well. So I was kind of on board for it anyways. And I suppose, who isn't a fan of raccoons? Like, it's impossible not to be. So, for a long time, I think, actually, Connor, you probably remember this. Like, I'm pretty sure my Discord profile picture was a raccoon for a good, 2-3 years. And I only recently changed it because I may have a sort of semi-professional interview going over Discord, and I don't want to ring them up with a raccoon profile picture. Maybe it will return in the future. Who knows? But no, yeah, my first exposure to it, I initially, when I booted it up, the game, first of all, the one thing that struck me straight away was, first of all, like the breadth, well, not so much breathtaking, but the almost, as I mentioned already, like the fantastic art style. Like, I love it so much. It's just something that's very appealing to me. It's one of those things that you can't really describe why you like it, you just kind of do. And the other thing was the soundtrack. I think I don't know if this was sort of a strange thing, but I was booting up the game sort of in the background while I was typing away at something for college, and I'll just to have it ready, I was just for a while I was just listening to the main menu music as I was finishing this up, and I was proper vibing to it. Like, I thought it was amazing. I thought this was so good. I was like, this is not the sort of level of detail I was expecting to come into, having heard of a game called Donut County about a raccoon and like his best friend. Like, so I mean, it was a fun I think the score matches it really well. It's kind of fun, goofy, and I think that's what the game kind of is as well. I think if you even read like one line of dialogue, you know this game doesn't take itself too seriously. But yeah, I suppose that was sort of my first encounter with it, really.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. I think the art style is really cute, really vibrant and colourful. I think it's done a wonderful job of having simple character models, but also be really expressive, and that really comes into play when you're in control of the whole and there's like someone making a pot like on a little clay stand or something, or or there's like other raccoons watching TV, and you take the TV away, or you take their table away on whatever they're doing, and you just see their face and their hands stop working the clay. There's like a lot of humor in this game, because the story is basically this raccoon that runs a donut shop, and he completely misunderstands what donuts are, because when someone orders a donut on the app, he basically has, I think, this device which opens up a hole in the ground and like sucks everything into it, and until eventually the whole town is underground, and has all been swallowed by these holes. So the game kind of flips back and forth from where everyone's underground and they're all blaming the raccoon. I think his name is BK, I think. And they're all saying how they got there, and then you get to like go back in time and be the little hole grabbing up all the things. And there's just a huge amount of humor. It's just like, oh, I ordered a donut, and that's like the thing that went wrong, is that they ordered a donut from this donut shop, and the raccoon, I don't know, it's like playing off that thing that raccoons love trash, and so they just like gather everything, and everything is valuable, which is fantastic. I mean, the story is like so simple, but it's got so much humor. I think you start off actually typing on you're not actually typing, but you're basically you've given a phone, and you're typing to the raccoon's friend, and you can either like send a message or send a duck. And that's like, even that is just so funny. I think does it like have a little quack sound or something? I found it hilarious that I can just send a duck, then they send a duck back, and then I can send 3 ducks. So I think you actually get an achievement for like sending 100 ducks on the phone, which is awesome. So yeah, what did you? I mean, we're not going to do a spoiler cast, I reckon.
No,
just
I don't think it's not long enough for it to be a separate spoiler cast.
There's not much to talk about, but how did you find the overall story and the characters?
Yeah, no, I really liked it. I think it does a really like, obviously it introduces you first of all to the gameplay in a very easy sense, because the gameplay is not complex, and I think it knows that from the get-go. So it's kind of just it kind of just says, here's a hole in the ground, suck up as much as you can. You grasp the concept that the hole gets bigger per thing you suck up. So it's very easy from the get-go. I love the again, kind of coming back to I think this all kind of links in with what sort of the story wise, but the way the art and all that looks. I love the aesthetic look of everything in the hole. I think it looks so cool because it's such a a blend and like a weird concoction of like different bits of the city all just like mashed together, especially. And I love the element of sort of the campfire scene where you're going around finding out how each person got down there. I think it's just so fun, and I just, it's one of those games that's it's addictive to play, like even though it is quite short. Like I think well, it's no surprise I did it in one sitting, but I didn't think, oh, I might leave this until tomorrow, or I might put this down, which is something I do with quite a lot of games. Maybe that's just me being really impatient with a lot of stuff, but no, that's something I always find myself doing with a lot of games. But for this game I was hooked on it all the time. I love the sort of it's kind of meta in a sense, because it treats the whole game as almost you're playing it on your mobile whilst you're playing it on the console. So I love the sort of idea of like you're leveling up as you suck these villagers down to like this sinking abyss, which I think is hilarious. Story wise though, I love the latter half of the game, and I don't think spoilers are going to be too big of an issue for this, to be honest. If you're someone who's I suppose a story enthusiast and doesn't want to have it spoiled, please, it's only like 2 hours, and you'll be able to come back and listen to this then. But I loved the bits at the end with the Trash King. I think it's just so funny. Like the dialogue is just so, it's like it knows it's not meant to be taken seriously, so it just like it's like as if like somebody just threw a first draft together and then nobody checked it, and I think that's so amazing. I don't know if that's like a sort of a backhanded compliment in some senses, but I think that's kind of what the game is going for. Like there's just such stupid stuff. Like one of the things will be like the Trash King will be trying to convince BK to come back onto his side, and it's like, oh, and then it's just randomly throughout the conversation, it's like, why is your hand stuck in a pickle jar? Like it makes, like there's nothing, like there's no reason for that to be in the conversation topic or for that to happen, but it's just like there, and I just love that sort of stuff. You know, the whole concept around it is really fun as well. I mean, it's kind of difficult to say what you kind of want to about it. I love the sort of humor it goes for. Like there's sort of there's a believable element to it, but it's got like just sort of these weird goofy takes put into it as well. Like I especially love the restaurant that nobody ever wants to go to but is somehow still in business, and that's because they have so many roaches around the place. I don't know, maybe it's just I think it's probably just because it's so quick in your face and it's just so goofy that it just kind of it works, and I think that's a testament in itself to the game, because a lot of the time games can go for this sort of goofy aesthetic or this goofy feel to it and it just falls flat, but this game kind of knows what it is. It's, you know, it knows how long it needs to be. It doesn't overstay its welcome. Granted, I'd love to see more of it, but it's done in a way that it makes it enjoyable, fun, and you don't feel like at any point in time that you're wasting your time playing it.
Yeah, one thing I want to say is that when you're watching the cutscenes and you're like tapping through the dialogue, one thing I noticed is that the animations of the characters change really quickly. So like if someone accuses BK of like swallowing the town and ruining it, and you tap to the next text box and he kind of goes, what? It's just like hilarious. Like I just love the whole thing. And I think, as you said, like once you start, because it's such a simple gameplay mechanic, is like you're literally, I mean, you might only just use two buttons, and to begin with it's just like the left thumbstick,
mm-hmm.
and it's literally just moving a hole around swallowing objects. And so like I don't know, you know, this is a game that a child could play. You know, I don't know if a child would find some of the later puzzles difficult, but they're certainly by no means, they are very simple puzzles.
Mm-hmm.
And once you start playing it, it's just very hard to turn it off, because like the visuals are so cool. The soundtrack is really just catchy. I think it's just one of those games that, especially when it came to Game Pass, I saw it, like you check what comes to Game Pass each week. It came to Game Pass, I saw it and went, oh, that looks cool, I'll grab that. And you know, you turn it on, it doesn't take up much hard drive space, and you're just like, you sat there or like for the next few hours you complete the whole thing. It's like, wow, that was really fun. That said, I think when it comes to gameplay, I think I've read a few of the reviews on the store. I think that some people felt that the gameplay doesn't evolve enough. So when you've got this mechanic, and it does do different things, like things can fall into the hole and then you can shoot them out of the hole, and there are quite a few cool puzzles with that. But I think some people's criticisms were that it didn't evolve enough, or the puzzles weren't challenging enough. I don't know what you would think if this game requires or needs to be one of those sort of games that evolves or gets to a challenging point in the puzzles, just because it is so simple, so laid back, like that kind of element that a child could pick it up and play it and would enjoy it.
Yeah, I would kind of counter to that in a sense. You know, if the game was longer, I could understand that criticism, but I think, you know, in like overall time, it's only about 2 hours. So I mean, granted, you know, in the fact that you get to, in that time period, I think you use the quadcopter, although it's not really for like any sort of major gameplay purposes. It's more for sort of an aesthetic choice near the end and the beginning. You have the ability to shoot things out of the hole, you swallow up stuff, you know, it's basic gameplay, but I think that's what it is. Like I wouldn't I'd be surprised if somebody was coming into this game with sort of the mindset of like, this has to be revolutionary and has to have something new that's going to entertain me every 5 minutes. Like, I think, unfortunately, I think that's more of a problem with I suppose some certain players expectations for games now, regardless of size or budget, is that everyone seems to see a AAA game and judge everything based off that. I think, you know, this game is an indie game for the most part, you know, and it's, you know, it's a short game. You know, it does something well and it sticks to that. You know, I don't think there's much more you can really ask for in that term. Could they have added in other stuff? Yeah, maybe, like, but at the same time, like, as I said, I think the game doesn't have enough levels without a new feature to make it feel like, you know, certain elements are overstaying their welcome. I think, you know, once you get the catapult part for, you only play a couple of levels, and I don't think it ever outstays its welcome. It's incorporated in different ways, especially in the final boss fight. You know, it's kind of interesting the way they've done that. So no, I don't think that's really a fair criticism. I think, you know, for the game it is and the length it is, I think it does it does what it does very well. And I would say to the people who kind of are giving out about that, yeah, sure, but at the same time I'm kind of thinking, you know, it seems like, you know, you can't really please those people anyways, because you've given such a fun experience in a short time. Now, granted, if they were to make, like, I suppose an add-on or an expansion or whatever, and it was another 2 hours, yeah, you'd probably expect something else. But for what it is, and like its first attempt in the game itself, yeah, no, I think it does it very well, and I'm definitely happy with what came out of it. What do you think, actually, of that point that they were making?
I absolutely agree. I think it's worthy of note that I mean, this is the developer of What Remains of Edith Finch, which is a very different game. It's a very serious game. I think quite an acclaimed game, actually, in terms of story and perhaps voice acting, I believe. And I think that although I've only researched this on Wikipedia, and it says there that Ben Esposito took part in a game jam and was inspired by a tweet and went and created this game just with this simple mechanic, and then decided he wanted to flesh it out and release it as a game. So I think that certainly the developer has followed the fun, or followed a fun idea, and perhaps that's what made it so great for Game Pass.
I mean, yeah, I just want to add on to that, like, you know, adding on to the gameplay of Donut County, like, if it isn't broke, don't try and fix it, you know. As I say, obviously it's a short enough game, and, you know, I think that's maybe a legitimate criticism to say it's too short, because, you know, games, I think as a whole, have been getting longer and longer. I personally don't have a problem with the length of it. As I've mentioned before, I think if you're coming at it from the perspective of someone who, like myself, is, you know, in college, finishing up with assignments at the end of the year, also doing work on the side, having a short game can actually be a blessing, because it means you can just sit down one evening and enjoy it for what it is. Certainly there's a place for longer form games. You know, we talked about Arkham Knight in our last episode. You know, that's a fantastic game to play over a long period of time. But for something that's just short and simple, yeah, I really enjoy it. I would say, oh god, I've forgotten my point now, which is the real embarrassing part of it all. What was the point, sorry, you were mentioning there just before I started talking?
About it coming to Game Pass and making it great for Game Pass.
There's something before that, I think, perhaps, that I was trying to latch on to.
Or
oh, sorry, I remember now. It was so sort of like the mechanics work is what I was trying to say. Like, and, you know, there's nothing in the game that feels like it detracts from the experience. So yeah, you could maybe make the argument that if this was a longer game, it would make sense to try and incorporate new stuff at the risk of hindering the gameplay, but at least you're trying new things. But with the length this is at, I think it has the right amount of features and the right amount of gameplay mechanics to make it enjoyable. So I feel like if you were to add on more stuff to that, it might even overload the player in the short space of time you have the game for. And it might feel like at the end, if there was too much stuff, it might feel like all of those little bits are underdeveloped and not, you know, fully utilized. Because, like, imagine if, like, so I don't know how many levels there are, but I'm going to assume there's, like, obviously because it's a 2 hour game, there's not that many. And if they evenly spread out when you get each element, say if you had 4 mechanics or 5 mechanics, by the time you get the 5th mechanic, you may only use it for a level or 2, and you might feel like, oh, well, I want to use that more. Like, why can't I do that? So I think the amount of stuff they've added in has allowed the player to not only, you know, use it, but to fully experience it and use it for what it is. So that's kind of what I was trying to get at with it.
Yeah, I think what what they've done is obviously they've taken a very familiar mechanic. I mean, I think if you look at footage of the game, I think that you're going to have seen something very similar before. I can't actually think of what the names are of the games that reminds me of, but I know there has been similar things, and what they've done is they've taken this familiar mechanic and put it with a very appealing art style, a very appealing narrative with great writing, great sound, and they've just made it the most fun experience it can be, basically. And I was thinking, because this is this is a short game, and perhaps this really shows kind of the value of Game Pass, because if you're getting if you get a week where you have a short game come to Game Pass and everyone plays it and everyone has fun with it, you're gonna create conversations with people and say, oh, that was really fun, and share that experience. Where I don't know if I'd buy this game standalone, or if I'd even hear of it if it didn't come to Game Pass.
I was sorry, I just want to jump in because I was gonna, so when you were mentioning sort of how long it is, I was kind of thinking in my head, if this wasn't on Game Pass, would you buy it, is the question. Would you feel like you got your money's worth out of it? I was looking there on Steam, it sells for $12 or $13. I think that's fair. I think that's a fair price to ask for 2 hours of gameplay, really, to be honest. So yeah, no, I would feel like you wouldn't feel too left out. If it was a $30 game, yeah, I'd be saying there needs to be more here, but it's $12, and plus it's on Game Pass. And I want to point out, for people like me who have extremely slow internet, it's only about 500 megabytes to download, so that's a blessing that you can download something in the same night and play it. So yeah, sorry, I kind of cut in there rudely on you. Sorry, Connor, go ahead.
No, it's a good point. And if you can if developers are able to create a short game that perhaps doesn't take a huge amount of time to develop, maybe while they're doing a longer project, and they can release it on Game Pass and get the instant kind of profit from that, and it supports them, and all the players who play it have a fun experience, and maybe they play Ben Esposito's other game, What Remains of Edith Finch. You don't know. I mean, it's just, I think it really shows the value of Game Pass for players looking for short, fun experiences, and developers who are creating small, little, fun, little passion projects, which I think we're going to see more of now because of Game Pass. Because people do have that safety net of, well, if I release this, I'm going to get the money I spent making it back with Game Pass, and then any sales on top of that will be just more icing, really. So I think it's a really positive thing, and I think when I recommended it, it's no, I don't think it has a huge amount of kind of longevity. It's not like you're gonna go, I mean, you can go back to it. I haven't, because I play new games all the time. But certainly when we were talking about short games on Game Pass that are fun to play, or a short game to do in a week where we're busy, my mind immediately went to Donut County, because it's just that was really fun, and it deserves some recognition. I think it was quite an interesting conversation over what a simple game with a simple mechanic can do. I don't know. Does a game suffer for not having kind of ultimate replayability or longevity?
That's a really good question, actually. I would say no. I think I gotta speak personally on a note here, because there's games that I've played, so let's take an example, The Last of Us, right? That's a really good story. That is definitely, I would argue, advanced the medium of games, both technically speaking and narratively speaking. And for the most part, it's good. It's a good story. It's a good game ish, I want to say. Do I think it's replayable? For me personally, no, I don't think so, because it's just, once I've experienced a story, especially something that's very much cutscene and narrative driven, like The Last of Us. I don't want it, like, I'm not going back for the gameplay of it. Like, the story is what drives that game. Now, The Last of Us 2 is probably a little different. I can't speak to that because I haven't played it. But The Last of Us 1, yeah, the mechanics are fine, but all those mechanics are done better in very much different games, right? Like, replayability games, I think of stuff like Halo, Destiny, although I'm not the hugest fan of it. I know it's very grindy and a looter shooter. But games like that, you know, like Halo is very much, you can pick any mission and kind of go to it because it's got such different variety, and especially in Halo 3 with the sandbox, you can find yourself in very different scenarios each time. So I would say a game doesn't need to be replayable for it to be good. You know, I think something like Death Stranding, God of War, the most recent one to a certain extent, The Last of Us, are all games that I think people should experience once, because I think they're good markers of good story, good visuals, and kind of, you know, they represent sort of the AAA standard in games at the moment. But I don't particularly think that I wouldn't be replaying them on a daily, weekly, monthly, or even yearly basis, to be honest. So yeah, no, I think games can be fun and good, and that's not to say that each game that is not, in my eyes, replayable has to be this, you know, statement piece. It doesn't have to be this sort of look into humanity or look into sort of greater meaning or whatnot. It can be something like Donut County, which is just pure fun for 2 hours. And I would disagree with you a little bit, because I do think Donut County is quite replayable if you just want to sit down, because again, I think the short length of it plays into that quite well, because the majority of it is, I think maybe 60% of it is gameplay and 40% dialogue, but you can skip through the dialogue quite quickly. But the question that you raised again, I think, is really good. So the answer to it, I think, is no. I think you can have a good game and it not be particularly replayable.
I think, yeah, I'm glad you challenged me there, because I think one of the things that I thought of listening to you talk is that we've discussed a few games now, and one of the things I've talked about with Halo, and I mentioned it briefly with Batman Arkham, is that when you give the player tools to play with, like toys in a sandbox, and there's like a sense of play, or there's a sense where, you know, right, go and do what you want to do, and there's a sense of fun and like their own use of those toys. I think what really works in Donut County, and what makes games with that kind of development ethos in mind, is that you can jump into Halo and you can tackle however you want to do, and you can say, okay, for this level I'm only going to melee enemies, and you can have fun with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what you can do in Donut County is you go in and you're this little hole, and you swallow objects depending on their size. But the sense of fun comes in. There's like, well, are you going to swallow it whole, or are you going to like throw it about a bit first? What are you going to, like, there's things to interact with, and there's characters that you affect when you're picking up things.
Mm-hmm.
So like, as I said earlier, you can take someone's clay table away and then see the expression on their face as like it's taken out from under them. And there's like a big sense of fun. Or you can like start tipping someone's stool into the hole and then change your mind and just like throw them across the room. Or I mean, there's so many things that you can play about with.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I got that sense when playing like Burnout Paradise recently. As I remember when I was a kid, I used to play that game and play in first person, and think, like, imagine my car was actually like some sort of beast on the road and then just crash into other cars. And like I think the best games kind of have that sense where you can create your own story out of it, and there's like a sense of play and imagination, and the way you interact with the game has a positive response feedback where it rewards you for playing how you want to play.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that Donut County is one of those games where it's replayable in the sense of you can turn it on, and yeah, it's sort of mindless in a way, but it is fun because it's not, although it's the same levels each time, it's not necessarily how you tackle those levels each time. I think games are strongest when they have that sense of, I think it's what every game wants to tease and market to you. Is like Cyberpunk had this huge thing about like, you know, you go in, you create your own character, you live your own life path in this city, and you get to do whatever you want to do. Now, that game didn't deliver that on that, and most games don't deliver on that true kind of your decisions matter experience, because there's always going to be like a level of superficiality in that if you do this decision, then this thing will always happen no matter what your decision, but it will have this spin on it. And, you know, that's why people might get disappointed at like Telltale or any of like Until Dawn or any of these games that promise like branches, but actually they don't go that far. So games where they have like kind of, because Donut County, while it's like a linear story, it's actually the moment to moment experience of the gameplay that is like, that keeps you hooked. It's not like Yakuza where you're like mindlessly like tapping through and reading. It's like when you're playing the game, and maybe this is like just too deep a point, but giving the player control to just play around with mechanics in your sandbox is just it's the most amount of fun you can have, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it brings up a really good point. And again, I think a lot of the conversations surrounding games always come back to this thing: is what does the game value more? Does it value player choice, or does it value the narrative in which it's trying to tell? And I think particularly for games, and again, I'm going to mention The Last of Us, because I think gameplay wise it's fine, it's serviceable, but it's in comparison to other games that have, you know, similar budgets and similar mechanics, it's done poorly, I would say. I would say though that in that area they have very much focused on telling a deep and engaging story, and they've done that really well. I think well, obviously I don't need to tell you that The Last of Us is probably one of the best narrative games that's ever been produced, not just in the last, you know, decade, but in all of gaming history. And I think the other alternative then to that is, you know, I suppose something like Doom, which is very much, you know, gameplay focused. Yes, there's story there, but it's certainly an afterthought for a lot of it. You know, it's all about making fun gameplay arenas in which you fight with a multitude of different weapons. And I think Donut County is at a sort of a similar approach. Granted, it's not you know, smacking demons in the face. It's more so you know, sucking up their homes. But it has delved into the gameplay first element, and I think there's something to be said as well. I think a problem with a lot of games now, and I think particularly we see this with a lot more sort of service based games like coming out recently, is that there's almost what's the word I'm looking for? There's almost an expectation for a title to be infinitely replayable, and I think I don't know what to think about that, really, to be honest. I think there's a lot to be said for shorter games that entertain the player for a while, but as I mentioned, you know, with this game, don't charge the player that 60 euro, 70 euro price tag that say a AAA game will. I think there's definitely different markets and, you know, different people who'd be interested in that sort of stuff. But for someone who's looking for just a quick bit of fun, you know, wants a bit of enjoyment out of a sort of a quick single player game, you know, this is sort of that scratches that itch. Like no game is ever going to you know, appeal to everyone. I think a really good example of this is Inside from 2017. You know, it's very much there's some playable mechanics in it, but it's very much a basic game, and it's narratively driven, and you know, it won a plethora of awards that year. And I don't even think Inside's particularly that long. It's actually quite short. And again, I think it's a good example, whilst being very totally different to Donut County. It's very much an example of, you know what you want to do it well, and don't overstay your welcome. That's the most important bit, because whilst replayability is an important aspect for a lot of games nowadays, if you're going to have a 10-hour campaign that really could be condensed into a 5-hour campaign, well, there's no point in it, because you're just dragging the player along for the sake of making it seem like a much more longer engaging experience than it actually is. And I don't think any game should really be putting in, as I would describe, artificial hours to try and keep the player in check. And that's a problem I think we've seen with a lot of these sort of looter shooters, especially with level systems, in which you need to be a certain level to access a certain area or to fight a certain boss. I think that's a really, I don't know, some people like that sort of grindy system. I've never been a fan of it. I absolutely despise it, because it holds me back as a player from trying to explore the world how I would want to. So yeah, I suppose the main point I'm trying to get from this point is, yes, there's something to be said for games being short, to the point, and just generally enjoyable for the time you play them. Not everything needs to be this blockbuster 15-hour campaign with a multiplayer that'll keep you playing for 5 to 6 years, you know. It can be something short, sweet, you know, to the point, and, you know, gives you, say, a quick, you know, 2 hours of enjoyment like this game does. And yeah, that's pretty much where I'm going to leave it off, I think.
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to that thing of, like, less is more. And it's like you can advertise that you've got this huge living world or city or whatever, but it comes down to the question, is like, yeah, but what am I actually doing moment to moment? And when I tried Red Dead Redemption 2 when it was on Game Pass, I think I didn't get very far into it, perhaps a few hours into it, and actually it was like, this is really slow and I haven't actually done much. It's like, I know that this game is probably going to be a lot more rewarding if I put the time in, but actually, like, moment to moment, like the first time you actually get to the open world segment, like I ran around, shot a few people. It was like, okay, that's all I came to do, but I had to like sit through loads of cutscenes and stuff. So yeah, I mean, when you have a game that is just like, you know, this is what it is, we're not pretending to be anything else, you know, it's always fun. But I did have a vision of Game Pass when I was playing Donut County, because, as I said, it was a short game, and I was under the ethos of looking on Game Pass every week. I was like, okay, well, what's the new thing I want to play? And you know, that's perhaps heightened, I think, this week by Outriders coming to Game Pass, because I'm sure that everyone is flocking to that. But I had a vision of Game Pass where, say, if it was like a weekly or a fortnightly release, and perhaps one game was chosen where Xbox said, okay, everyone, this is our prescribed game for the month or prescribed game for the week or whatever. Do you remember like 1 versus 100 on the 360, and how many people used to play that, and you get like all of your friends, and there'd be like a true audience of people playing along with the quiz show. I was thinking, like, is there a scope in the future for Game Pass to become something where similar to how, you know, because what it's trying to do is like emulate kind of Netflix and Disney Plus and stuff. And Disney Plus, you know, brings out WandaVision or The Mandalorian, and I'm sure like most of the people on those subscriptions watched those shows. Are we ever going to get to a point where Game Pass has a system where everyone or almost everyone will play a certain game, or, you know, that's picked to be short enough to be game of the month or something, where it tries to get everyone to play it and somehow interact with each other and bring people close together? I sort of had that vision. I don't know what you'd think of that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, it's definitely a possibility. I could definitely see that happening a lot more once games released by, say, Bethesda and games such as Halo Infinite start to come around the corner. I think there's going to be a large level of marketing surrounding those games, especially since they're going to be on Game Pass day one. I think one thing to kind of note on it is that sort of the ethos, especially for Xbox with regards to games, has changed quite a bit in the market space. You know, for a large time it was very much Xbox promoted their exclusive games like Halo, Gears of War, Forza, you know, at either E3 or even before that, you know, when we all remember Halo 3's magnificent marketing campaign. You know, and I think now it's very much it's like, yes, this new game is coming, but we're pushing this for Game Pass. You know, Game Pass is always mentioned anytime you hear about Xbox now. And, you know, as someone who was there when Game Pass was first introduced and it was quite lackluster, you know, the change in which they've approached it is evident, like so blatantly obvious. And it's so great to see, I think, particularly because it means that AAA games are accessible to the people who just solely want to sort of play new titles as they come out. But also for those who, you know, like ourselves, you know, who are playing games on a very regular basis and want to be exposed to more indie titles. Because I think for a long time, indie games, unfortunately, were very much relegated to solely just being viewed by PC players because Steam promoted them so much. You know, the official PlayStation Store and the Xbox Store for a long time just promoted big AAA games that were published by their companies, and sort of any other game you'd kind of have to go really rooting for. And I think the great thing about Game Pass now is that you can have someone who maybe has a vision for a game they'd like to make and wants to get it out to an audience, and Game Pass is the perfect element for that, because I think the numbers have shown, like, you know, more people are flocking to Xbox, more people are flocking to Game Pass. You know, developers are actually on the whole getting more money with Game Pass than if they were to release a game solely on their own. So it's making gaming as a medium much more viable for sole developers, or for even smaller development companies than it was beforehand. You know, I remember you brought up I can't remember the name of the documentary, but it includes the creator of Fez and Super Meat Boy. You might just remind me of it there.
The indie game movie.
Yeah, so with kind of that, like, at least from my knowledge of remembering that film, like, there was a lot of pressure on the creators of Super Meat Boy to have the game on the Xbox arcade at a certain time, getting sales at a certain time. I'm not saying that Game Pass completely destroys that need, but it certainly makes it a lot more easy for developers who want to release a game. Like, because as we mentioned, game that we were talking about, and we actually interviewed Thomas, the Falconeer, released in November. You know, it got its sales from that, came to Game Pass, was actually quite heavily promoted on Game Pass in February of this year, and now I think it's, as you mentioned, it's coming to Games with Gold next, which is going to expose it to another audience, and he's still making content for that. I genuinely believe that, you know, without stuff like Game Pass or Games with Gold, you know, this title would have unfortunately gone under the radar pretty much for the rest of this year, and nobody would have really heard about it, and I don't think we would have seen it nominated for the BAFTAs either if that was the case. And I'm happy to see that for a large proportion that this sort of notoriety is coming for smaller creators, and I would like to see them promote them a bit more. It tends to almost be at the moment when they release a new batch of games onto Game Pass, it's like, look, here's our big AAA title. So this month it was kind of like Outriders, and I think the one that everyone was kind of excited for as well was Octopath Traveler. But then there was like a load of other games there that were kind of just kind of swept in. I'd like them to maybe have like I think I know that Xbox has planned to very much expand into the indie market and give those indie games a platform, which I am so happy with. You know, it's great to see, because it adds so much diversity to the market, because I'm sick of seeing, you know, like, let's say, for example, like EA Play, yeah, it's a decent service, but most of the games in that are just first-person shooters and car racing games and the occasional Dead Space. And, you know, that format is fine for anyone who loves that, but it gets stale after a while. Game Pass has a great diversity of games from all genres, from all, you know, forms of development. And it's so amazing to see all that come together, because it's got something for everyone, and it's at such a fantastic price as well. Sorry, I sound like a salesman here, but, you know, I think we have a podcast dedicated to this. We're going to be somewhat passionate about it. But yeah, no, sorry, to kind of err on the point again, yes, I think that they should maybe promote sort of more monthly based games that everyone could get on, particularly multiplayer ones, because it's always nice to see populated games from the past, you know, get repopulated. I think even particular, one thing that springs to mind is when Epic Games made Star Wars Battlefront 2 free for PC players. You know, the servers maxed out that week, and I think even for the week after that, there was so many people playing it that they couldn't run as many servers. You know, it would be fantastic to see something like that happen for games. Like, yeah, so I'm going to leave it at that, but yeah, I would agree. I would love to see something like that in the future.
Yeah, I think it's it's a wonderful platform. I mean, to like put indie games alongside AAA games, and like they have equal space in that library, so that when you're going through, and I'm far more likely, I think, to download an indie game than a AAA game, just because there are. I mean, I'm willing to take the risk with an indie game, because I know that probably most AAA games I won't enjoy that much, just because I've seen and played most of them before. And it's just like, well, I know what they're selling. Whereas an indie game is like, oh, this looks cool, this looks different, this looks new. And how important that is that they're given that same space. And I think that Xbox may be trying to do the same with Japanese games. Get Japanese games in there so that you have kind of both kind of Western and Eastern games in that space.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the more diverse it becomes, the more everyone benefits. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think Games with Gold is similar to what I was talking about with, you kind of get those. It's the same models like PlayStation Plus, where you get kind of 3 or 4 games every so often. And I think PS Plus is great, because I think did Fall Guys release on PS Plus?
Yes, it did.
So like you have like a big release like that, and everyone kind of flocks to that game. And as I said, I'm sure everyone's doing that with Outriders on Game Pass. But how wonderful is that when like all of a community can flock to a game, and
mm-hmm.
It's highly populated for that time. I think it's an interesting model, and I think they can go places with it. And I'll apologize to Donut County for hijacking this episode to get a broader talk about Game Pass. But just because it's a shorter game, I think it warrants a talk about where Game Pass is at the moment, and kind of how it's functioning, and what games like Donut County do for the platform,
mm-hmm.
which I think is really interesting. But unless you've got any more notes, Odhrán.
No, I think I'm good.
Yeah, well, I think that was probably our discussion on Donut County and all things Game Pass. If you enjoyed this and generally have Game Pass and like to discover new games on it, do tune in again next time. I think our next episode should be on Halo 2, and of course we're going through a Halo game a month, hopefully to get them all done by the time Halo Infinite finally drops. So tune in next time to hear our thoughts all about the Halo 2 campaign and the multiplayer. But for now, we are the Unofficial Game Pass podcast, and thank you for listening.